Hi, my name's Tom, and I worked on the Final Fantasy XIV app with Jen.
Hi, my name's Jen, and I worked on the Final Fantasy XIV web app with Tom.
Okay, so Final Fantasy XIV is a MMORPG that's just had a new expansion come out, which has created a sudden influx of new players like myself. And the hunting log is part of that, where you basically get given a specific list of enemies that you need to kill within regions across the world. The difficulty for new players like me is all you get given is the name of the mob and the region that it's in. And some of these regions can be quite large, so it's difficult to know where they are. When I first started playing, I was trying to Google the mob names and the actual hunting log, but there's no single resource that allowed you to find all of the mobs easily, which is where the idea for the app came about. So this is what the actual app looks like. In the middle, there's the interactive map, the list of monsters down the right, and then the filters on the left. So if we select Marauder, for example, it will populate the map with the enemies that you need to kill as part of the Middle Lenosha map at rank 1. And from there, you can add as many filters as you need for the class, so you could class Summoner as well, and then move the map to wherever you need to be, including the rank as well, and that will all update in real time for you.
As you can see here in VS Code, this is the basic architecture of our app using React. So we had the components themselves, each one of these. So we had the filter sidebar, the basic JavaScript algorithm data using the JSON payload that was mentioned on the previous slide. We have the map and the monster list sidebar as well. We did implement a nav bar as well. This was going to be used for the login system. That became more of a stretch goal eventually, but we used this just to give the look and feel of the game itself with the UI that they use.
For the mobile design, we effectively wanted to make the map as prominent as possible, because that's the visual representation of where you need to go for each mob. So if I just select Marauder again for Middle Lenosha, and then switch over to the preview for mobile, effectively what you're given is the whole filter component at the top, which works exactly the same as it would on desktop, but you are given this little filter button which allows you to hide that, so that the map can be the main focus for you, and then you can just switch through and everything works as it normally would. So this was created by effectively using a mobile first approach, so everything's displayed as its current block by default, and then at a specific width we turn it to a grid based format, which is what the desktop version would see. The filter itself is introduced by using a little bit of state in conjunction with just the ternary operator to switch between display show, block of none, and block, and then the filter itself targets the checkboxes, and everything's just tagged as mixed blend mode luminosity, and then once it's checked, the mixed blend mode switches to normal, which gives it the nice little highlighted effect. So a couple of the technologies that we used were Figma and Trello, which we used at the very initial stages of the process to basically map out how we wanted the app to look. So these were the mocks that we created at the time, which I think we actually stuck to quite well, which shows all of the components that we were required, as well as the mobile design. There is a couple of elements on here that we didn't manage to complete, such as the login, logout buttons, as well as things such as pulling through your character's avatar as part of the XIV API, which I'll cover in more detail later on. And then above that is the kind of like the login mockups that we wanted to incorporate, where we could hook into things like Google, Facebook, and Discord. Again, these were the kind of the goals that we had planned, reached, which is part of the Trello board. So this is what we used to basically keep track of everything that we were doing throughout the process, mapped out into the core requirements, the nice to haves, and the stretch goals. the majority of the core requirements were fixed, but there are a couple on there which we did have issues with and just didn't solve in time, which I'll cover at the end of the videos. But it was really great just to be able to keep track and know what each other was working on and where we were at with it.
So using Leaflet, this is the map component. So it was just a bit case of using basic imports and installing via npm. The React specific components that are used from React Leaflet, as I say, made the process a lot simpler. So we have the map container, we have the bounds that were taken directly from the game data itself. So the XY coordinates only went up to 42. We can set the minimum zoom, the maximum zoom, just to ensure that the user can't zoom in too far and get up too close or too far out so the map ends up really small. The image overlay, as I said, was what steered us away from using the Google Maps API, as that then allowed us to overlay our own game data maps instead for each region. And this was just put across using a very simple map overlay image and taken directly from the JSON payload. The markers themselves were taken using a basic map function, and this would then just map over all the different mobs within that JSON payload to spit out the ones that were correct to the filter system itself. So stale state wasn't a concept that we had come across during the course itself, but through plenty of Stack Overflow and Googling, we found out that it was essentially outdated data. The reason I was able to come across this was the two initial filters. So we filter by job, we filter by map, and we filter by rank. Getting the two initial filters, so the job and the map, to work together in tandem were quite simple. At this point, I was still only able to get one job at a time rather than multiple jobs to work with the map. However, once we introduced the rank itself, it meant that no data was showing up on the map, or it was only taking the initial state of, example, rank 1, and anything that was changed after that, it wouldn't output that data. Through extensive console logging and just playing around with our app itself, it turned out that each time we changed a value in the filter, the data itself was one step behind. So if I changed my filter to, example, an Arcanist and a Marauder, at this point, once I hit the Marauder button, it would only populate the Arcanist data. To fix this, the solution was actually quite simple in the end. It just meant taking those initial providers that we put together, so the map, the filter, and the monster list, and combining them into just one simple filter provider. So it meant then that by passing it down to the children, each component could then just take in the data that it required. As you can see here, the map only needs the map overlay image and the marker list. The filter sidebar obviously requires a little bit more. It takes in the handle image URL, check state, handle change, handle rank, and the monster list sidebar. Very simple, again, just requires the map overlay image, marker list, and rank. So this was a really good but steep learning curve throughout the project, in just kind of realizing that sometimes you may need to change your approach while going through a thought process. So what made sense for us at the beginning to, again, compartmentalize all the information, the data that we required into separate providers, ended up holding us back, and then refactoring it into that single provider is what then allowed the app to work as it should have done.
So one of the major problems and challenges we faced was the actual removal of markers. So effectively, when we were in this app, let's say, for example, we're Thaumaturge, these are the 4 mobs that we need to hunt within Western Thanalan. We wanted it so that if we could tick off, for example, we'd killed the little ladybug, we'd want that to actually be removed from the map itself, so that you didn't have any kind of like crossover. As soon as something was ticked off, it was gone from the map. As soon as the map was empty, you could then move on to the next zone. But we just couldn't get our heads around it in the end up, because we had so much state going on, which Jen's covered in detail about the stale state that we were encountering. And it was just one of them things that it doesn't really affect the end product as a minimum viable product. You can still use it, and I have used it in real world situation where I'm using it to level up a couple of characters now. and it's so much quicker than doing the old Google and trying to find the coordinates and then hunting down. But it would have been a nice quality of life if we could have figured that out. Another thing that we actually wanted to do but just didn't have the time to complete was to have the region be conditional. And by that I basically mean like we've currently got Thaumaturge selected, which does have mobs that we need to kill. But if I open up the region filter, all of the maps that are available are still there. And if we go to East Shroud, for example, there's no mobs for us there to kill with the filters that we've got selected. So we did actually want that to be based on the actual filters, which we just never got round to. Some of the other directionals, the character login that we wanted to do, so that it created a nice little avatar based from the XIV API. Grand companies was another thing, which would effectively be another filter, and all that is kind of like your guild that you would be assigned, and they've got their own set of mobs that you need to kill with their own location. So they all use the same maps. It was just another chunk of data that we would have needed to grab and incorporate. One of the biggest ones I think that would have been quite fun to get to was the marker cluster, which is this here. And all it does is if there's multiple markers that are very tightly close knit together, what this does is actually groups them up until you zoom in. But there's always going to be those little bits that you can add to and tweak to make it a better end product.